Just something I've been thinking about. I teach history, and I find much relevance to the study of world history, longitudinal history, history over time. I find great value in broad history, long history. Why? Because you see the rise and fall of institutions and ideas and cultures and religions. And in that rise and fall, you see dynamics that repeat over time. You see repetitions of mankind. And in those repetitions, in the rise and fall of things, in conflict, in simply having numerous historical examples in your own mental database, you're able to more readily sense the repetitions of man, which means it's easier to predict outcomes of things like politics, money, the rise and fall of companies, the changing of markets, the support behind a strong leader, cultural issues, religious issues. Some of the same phenomena simply repeat through time. And once you have seen enough of it, it's like being a very old, wizened person. If you experience, or not only experience, have knowledge of more repetitions of the rise and fall of time, of man, of cultures, of institutions. You have more examples in your mental database. And so in a way, it gives you the ability to make better investment choices. And this is kind of what I wanted to address right now, is the value of history to certain actual fields. Not just vague notions like, oh, you're able to watch the news and predict what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks based on your knowledge of history and what usually happens. In general, your ability to gauge probability is more focused. But that's all very general, and I want to get very specific. And I was thinking of different fields, different careers, different jobs that people might have who could really reap the rewards of the knowledge of world history, history over time, the repetitions of man. Who would really value, like financially, economically, bottom line is economics, how much money is made. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, who would really benefit from truly understanding and having a grasp of world history? They have numerous examples in their mind, and they have different leaders they know about their rise and fall, how they became famous or how they became demonized, military conflicts, military strategy, cultural issues, changes in art, dynamics that affect every level of culture from art to war. What field would really benefit? And you're probably thinking right now, what fields would really benefit? Some would probably say, just from my experience with having many hundreds of students, many students, of course, think that history is almost completely irrelevant, and sometimes express that. Sometimes history makes people angry because they feel like it's wasting their time much more than, say, sitting at home and watching a sitcom. People become very angry. And I think this anger comes from a lack of knowledge of history. It's like a defensive mechanism. It's not an actual, how could you actually hate historical knowledge? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I see sort of anti-intellectuals as people who try to disparage knowledge of history and philosophy and that sort of thing, simply because they could say, hey, it doesn't directly relate to income. And I think in most careers it does not. It absolutely does not relate to income. So if you work retail, worker, if you're an event manager, there's so many careers, 99% of the careers out there, you don't really need a knowledge of history. You just need discipline and, whatever it takes, fate, chance, to excel at your field. I'm not saying history is something you must have. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying it has value. And in some fields, to some people, it can even have a great value. And that value isn't always financially, but let's actually stick to that. Let's stick to financial. What field could actually financially benefit from a knowledge along history? I'm talking about big money. I'm talking about, maybe it's becoming very obvious who I'm talking about. And I'm talking about actual individuals who invest money in commodities, stocks, or even upstart businesses based on their own intelligence and understanding of markets. They're people who, we often call them investors, but not all investors are the same, let's be honest. Some investors are what I call sort of alpha investors. They have a general knowledge of the market, but they also somewhat aggressively, or at least at first, until they get a knowledge of how things work, try to understand individual companies. So they're reading, Newsweek and newspapers. They're reading magazines, maybe even pop culture magazines, to see what trends are emerging and what trends are falling. And so therefore, they invest their money in a company that is on the rise, but before they reach their peak. Or they figure out how to sell before that stock begins to diminish. And to be able to do that, there are several things you can do. There's one that's illegal called insider information, insider trading information. That's like when somebody from a company, let's say Sony, communicates with an investor that something is happening within the company. It's exclusive information, which is going to, say, have them pull their stocks out or put more in or what have you. Insider information. But the other thing is what I spoke about, is that investor who uses their own experience and intellect to monitor events, new companies, old companies, big companies, small companies, trends in government. Like you can watch changes in government, and if you have a simple knowledge of industry and the market, you can see where certain laws and bills and decisions made by politicians can affect certain companies. So, if a politician decides to lift a tariff on a foreign company that sells shoes, well, that means your local shoe companies are going to have more competition because that tariff has been lightened for foreign competition. So to an investor, that's important. That's financial. That's thousands of dollars if they're investing in a certain company, maybe even millions, So I think if we really look at the value of world history, you can have value simply by having knowledge, especially in certain fields, like if you're an author. Gosh, a knowledge of world history, the more historical examples you have from reality can help your fiction writing, can help you generate ideas and understand possibilities. It allows your mind to have more tools at hand. If you're any sort of creative type, it just simply gives you more data to pull from the ethers, so to speak, to put into your art, into your creations. But I tell you, the field of the elite investor, somebody who is a watcher of the market and politics and engages their investments thusly, is someone who could greatly benefit from a knowledge of longitudinal world history. Thank you.